Hello and welcome to the Success Showcase. I'm your host, Eric Lopkin from the Modern Observer Group. And with me, as always, is Chip Janiszewski from the Happiness and Success GPS. Chip, how are you doing this week?
I am doing great. How about you, Eric?
Doing fantastic. It's hard to believe, but it's fall already, and here in New England, haven't gotten to the point where colors are changing yet, but you can feel it on the horizon.
Now, it's starting a little bit here. I got a lot of woods here, and we hardly had any rain at all in September after a crazy year. And it kind of reminds, I don't think we've had rain in 2 weeks. And it reminds me of an old commercial, real old commercial, where you have a whole bunch of snowplows sitting in a parking lot waiting. And then one snowflake falls on the ground and they all rush towards it. They're waiting for rain.
Yeah, weather's been very strange all around the country. Um, and we'll see what happens with that. But fall in New England is always beautiful, so that's
Sure
always
is.
something to look forward to. And speaking of looking forward to, I have been looking forward to our guest today. We have Katherine McMahon of Phoenix 818. Katherine, welcome.
I am so happy to be here with you, Eric, and you, Chip. And I don't live in New England anymore, but fall in New England is one of my favorite times. So
Well, it's so good to have you here today. Why don't you tell our listeners a little bit about yourself?
I would love that. So my background is in all things marketing. I was in corporate for more than 20 years in a variety of roles, a lot of different disciplines, things that a lot of people don't think of as marketing, like pricing strategy, for example. And about 14 and a half years ago now, I actually started my own business because I have such a heart for small businesses, especially impact driven, aligned businesses, that I really wanted to use my skill set to help them be successful and survive and thrive and help more people.
Fantastic. So, how did you get into marketing in the first place?
By accident.
Okay.
Um, my childhood dream was actually to be an intellectual property attorney, which is, of course, what every little kid wants to
Of
be.
course.
Yes.
But while I was going through that from an academic perspective, I got my first marketing gig when I was 18 years old. A friend of my father's had patented a new product, an invention. And my dad's like, well, my daughter can help you, because his intended marketplace was the college market. So he's like, she's got great perspective. She's creative, talk to her. So I did all the market research and product branding and positioning for a product called Poster Props. So literally, like, it just kept happening over and over again. The jobs I would get were marketing related. Like, I was a buyer for a department store and as a college job. So it just, life is what happens when you're making other plans.
Yes, it
I
is.
got through my MBA, never made it to law school, and here I am way too many decades later, still in marketing and realizing it was just where I was meant to be.
Yeah, I'm glad you put it that way because you and I have had this conversation offline before, but you've talked about the fact that you feel you are fulfilling your mission.
I absolutely
How,
do.
how is it that you realized that?
Well, one of the things that I think is a true indicator, I mean, I had external indicators as well, but when you would do something for free, when you can't not do something, it's usually a good indication of you're on the right track. And even like when I was even still in corporate, if a friend came to me and they had their own business and they were like, oh, I'm stuck here, I would always jump in and try to help. And during the pandemic year, I work with a lot of local businesses. So there was a period of time in my business where all my clients had to pause. And even then, I was helping friends that had businesses and stuff just because, like, I literally can't not do this. even if I were to retire someday, which I don't really imagine, but I would probably still be helping like friends on the side or helping charities grow, or like it's in my DNA. And I think that's how we know that we're aligned with our purpose, is just like the compulsion to do it is always there.
It is fantastic. And just to clarify for our listeners, you mentioned that you deal a lot with local customers. That local is the Dallas area.
It is. I'm in Dallas Fort Worth now. Although what I mean by local businesses is businesses that serve a local community. They are not always local to
Oh,
me.
okay.
So, for example, I worked with a very large orthodontic practice because they had 9 locations up in New Jersey as their fractional CMO for a while. So it's more just, I love working with people that are touching people's lives in a like very tangible daily way. And so most of the businesses I work with have some local component to it.
Excellent.
No, it looks like as far as the metamorphosis of you 20 years ago to where you are right now and so on and so forth, obviously the marketing world has changed a lot. But in looking at your bio here, you have also in your approach to things, in the way that you see things and the people that you want to deal with and so on and so forth. And I'm sure that we will get your website link at the end of this, but I would encourage people to go to the Who I Am section because it kind of talks about that whole thing. But I mean, if basically taking a look at what you're doing, I mean, you want to make sure that you are dealing with everybody and regardless of who they are, but realizing that we are all different and that we all need to work together in every single kind of way. And that's just the way things always were. I mean, Eric has heard me talk about this a lot of times. I talk about my kindness platform presentations, and I start with creation. And creation, we all came from the same source, which is loving kindness and good. And then we all also have our knowledge and we have our free wills through which we created all kinds of wonderful things and all of our differences. And it's human nature to have basically self-conscious feelings. And with that comes comparing, criticizing, and all the other stuff that happens. So obviously your approach is to throw all that aside and to get straight right up front as far as what you're dealing with. And that's so fantastic. I can imagine that your clients love working with you on this because you are who you are now. And obviously, I think that's probably been a nice journey for you.
It definitely has been. And, I mean, the reality is I will always be a lifelong learner, which is good in marketing because, I don't want to say the internet didn't exist when I started marketing, because it did. And no, Gore did not create it. The internet wasn't used for marketing purposes until I was already more than a decade into my career. And so we had to learn and adapt, and, new social platforms come out all the day. And I just love that journey. But to your point about like one of probably my top value in my business is alignment. And what I keep seeing is when we listen to the gurus, and there are a lot of really, really smart marketing people out there, and they're talking about a specific tactic or maybe even strategy, they're not looping it back to who the business owner is. And so I talk to a lot of business owners that feel like they're showing up in their business as only a portion of themselves. And one of the things I really try to do is look for ways that they can incorporate their full self. And a lot of it is fear-based, that they are afraid if they show up as fully them, because our society is a little bit polarized these days,
Just a
that
little.
just a little, that they will, somehow that will negatively affect their business. But the reality is, as humans, we have so much more in common than we do that's different. And so when we show up as fully human, fully ourselves in our business, in our marketing, we're going to draw people to that because people want that. They want the human connection. We're literally created to be in connection. And when we can put that aside in our marketing and in our business and customer journey, and it makes people feel safe. It makes them trust you more. And honestly, it makes us like our businesses more because, if you're showing up as half yourself, it's not much fun.
Yeah. And people
Very
can see
true.
right through you if you are too.
Also true.
Plain and simple. Yes. So, I mean, Eric and I obviously talk about networking a lot, and it's all about developing trust and relationships. And you can see right through people to see what their purpose is in networking, whether it's this as far as I'm running my figures like I have a lot of cash in my hand, or whether it is serving people and just working that way. People will see that right through you if you're not like that. And the bottom line is you will have a whole lot more fun and feel totally fulfilled if that's where you're coming from.
Absolutely.
Yes, and just as an aside for our listeners, Chip mentioned 20 years. Catherine started talking about, where the internet was. Our listeners should understand that Catherine started marketing at age 6. So
Thank you, Eric. You're so kind.
Yeah, it was her, not Gore, that created the internet.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, it's been a while. We'll just leave it at that.
Right.
As one of my mentors says, I am not a spring chicken, I am a seasoned chicken.
There you go. Yeah. I like that. So, talking about putting half of yourself into a business, how do you work with folks to get their message to align with their mission?
My framework, the aligned marketing method, always starts with who the business owner is. The majority of the businesses I work with are under 20 employees. I have worked with larger ones, but a lot of them are under 20 employees. And because they're impact driven, their culture, their DNA, if you will, is still very founder driven. And so a lot of people in marketing start with who you're marketing to. I actually start with who is the business? What's the founder's values? What's the business culture? What does the business stand for? And what's important to them? And then what we look to do is connect the dots out from there. So that's why I talk so much about alignment is if you start with who you are, you're going to show up more fully. And then you want to find the audience that resonates to that alignment, whether it's shared values, shared vision. And then beyond that, you want to look at, okay, what problem does that audience have? And make sure that we're, again, that straight line, as much as you can connect dots in a straight line in your marketing, your growth's going to accelerate. And then of the problem they have, what's the transformation that your company, your individual business is most suited to solve? Where can you make the biggest impact? And before we ever start talking about marketing messaging or what channels or things like that, we're getting that clarity around the foundation of your business and then building all the marketing on top of that.
Nice. And, all of these concepts should be very familiar to our listeners because it's essentially what we talk about with start with why. When you know your why, you know your mission, and that's your starting point.
Yeah.
So,
And go ahead.
no.
I love Start With Why, though. I just shout out to Simon for writing the book because I think it's one of my favorites.
Yeah, I've read it numerous times. It's a fantastic message, and some of the examples he gives are perfect. You don't, if you're he talks a lot about Apple computers. Like if you're buying a computer, well, yeah, a computer is a computer when you get right down to it. But what attracts people to Apple was, at least under Steve Jobs, the mission of the company. What, their dedication to design, to the little details.
Well, and even their first, I still think it's one of the greatest ads of all time. which was the Super Bowl ad back in
1984.
1984 when they introduced the Macintosh for the first time. What most people don't realize is Apple only paid to run that commercial once, which was the Super Bowl spot.
Yep.
And yet, even younger generations that weren't around then know of the ad, but it was taking a stand. It was a much broader message than just, hey, you know, we can give you a computer. It was literally shifting the mindset around what finding the right computer for you actually meant. And it's why so many in the early days, the adopters of Macintosh were education, were creatives, were people that were a little outside the suit and tie corporate America category, because they wanted to be different. They wanted to express themselves. And Apple has always created products that allow you to express yourself.
Exactly. And they started with the why. It was all about the people they were connecting with, not so much the product. And that's very important in a marketing message.
Yeah, they weren't even the one to create the GUI, graphical user interface.
No,
Those of you that are insiders.
No, that was created by Xerox.
It was.
Yes.
So, you know, it's not that Apple, their products are innovative, but that was never their positioning, because you're right. He cared so much about serving the audience and what the audience needed that it became one of the most iconic brands in the world.
Exactly. Now, one of the tools you use is, if I'm getting the name right, because I'm blanking at the moment, StoryBrand.
Yes, that is one of the tools I use.
Tell us a little bit about what StoryBrand is.
So StoryBrand is a storytelling narrative specifically applied to marketing. The framework was, I say created by Donald Miller, but storytelling principles existed. He was the first one that created this specific framework application of what is good Hollywood storytelling, but applying it to your marketing. And one of the reasons I chose to get certified is because messaging is part of the framework I work on with clients. And StoryBrand is just so clear. And so much of marketing out there might be beautiful. Like, there are a lot of beautiful websites, but that you go to them and you're like, what does this person do? I mean, they're beautiful. You're visually attracted to it, so you want to consume the content, but then you get there and you're confused. And a confused mind doesn't buy, which was the basic premise of StoryBrand. Was we need to give a narrative through line to our messaging that is clear and also centers your customer as the hero. Because the other thing that you see a lot of the times on small business websites, although I can think of some big businesses that make this mistake too, is, you know, like if it's a family business, oh, this business has been around since my grandfather's time and I'm the third generation. So the truth is, your customer just doesn't care. What they care about most is that you understand them, you see them, they're the hero of your story, that you understand the problem that they're facing, and that you have a solution to it. And if I come to your website, your social media, any channel, and I don't immediately, as your potential customer, see myself in that, see my problem and what it's going to look like for you to solve my problem, I'm going to leave. And a lot of websites aren't taking their customers' viewpoint into their story and really telling their customer's story, not their own story.
Yeah, that's very true. I did a website redesign for our company probably about a year or so ago. And when I was doing it, I was looking at consulting sites and a whole bunch of other sites. And one struck me. It was one of the major consulting sites consulting companies in the country. And I looked at the website and everything was we. And it's like, wow, they're just talking about themselves. There was nothing about the client.
Yeah. And that's pretty common. And it's not that, it's not negative intent,
Right.
at least the majority of the time. It's not like ego or things like that. It's just simply the belief that we have to prove ourselves for people to
Yes.
buy from us. And the truth is that, yes, expertise matters. Part of the story brand framework is showing your authority as the guide, but we have to make the customer the hero of the story. Like, Donald Miller uses a lot of movie analogies in his books. And, I'm spending the next 2 days from when we're recording this coaching on the story brand live stream and guiding people through creating this. And movies work because they're pop culture, but having the story of Hunger Games center Hamish instead of Katniss would make a lot less interesting story.
Yes.
Katniss is the hero of the story. He is the guide.
Very true.
And you can use Star Wars, and pretty much any major blockbuster has that same narrative. But we had to know that he was actually qualified to be her guide. So he was a past winner, which is how we knew
that gave him the credibility.
So, but you only needed one sentence basically in the book to prove that he was in the right role.
Chip?
Yes. As Eric and I do a lot of, we talked about networking before. And when I teach networking, I always start with the networking misconception. If I'm running a meeting with 80 people in it, I said, nobody comes here with a shopping cart. People only buy things when they need or want them, but they do care about you. And so they're interested in what you're doing. The bottom line is you see networking people wearing badges, and every single badge behind that says the words with them. What's in it for me? It's just human nature. So obviously, when you come up with all these gadgets over the years in marketing to tell people what you do and so on and so forth, and you're so proud of yourself and you get it out and so on and so forth, it just gets back to need and want. The bottom line is marketing is all about building relationships with people so that you can refer them to somebody when they need or want what you do. It's plain and simple that way. And so by you making the customer the hero and spotting that on right up front, that answers what's in it for me right then. Okay, I'm interested. I'm going to continue watching it. So, I mean, obviously the approach, it's not radical. It's brilliant, but it's always the way things have been.
It's simple and
Yep.
it's clear.
Yep.
And Chip, you're so right about networking, because I actually, depending upon what type of business, like if your listeners are product-based businesses, that this doesn't work the same way because they're probably not using networking as a primary marketing strategy. But, your coaches, your consultants, your service providers, a lot of them do. And if you come up to somebody and they're like, oh, what do you do? And I just say, oh, I'm a marketing consultant for small businesses, the conversation is done.
Yep.
Ends there. If I say, you know how small businesses tend to be constrained on resources, and they're spending this time, money, and resources on marketing, and they're not really sure if it's working, I help them figure out what's going to work and what's going to bring them the biggest bang for their buck with those resources.
Yep. And
I didn't have to say I was a marketing consultant at all.
no, and they don't really care. I mean, basically, networking is just the process of developing win-win relationships. And when I look at those 80 people, I always tell people, everybody in this room knows an average of 200 people. Picture everybody in this room standing against the wall and there's a door behind them. And by gaining their trust, that door is open and relationships are potential resources for you. And that's really what it's all about. And that makes networking fun. The reason most of these networkers fail is because either their companies or other people teach them the wrong thing. And basically, the networking misconception is I join a chamber or something else, therefore I get. And
Yeah.
that's just not the way that it works. And so just turning that around and making the customer the hero. And by the way, when somebody walks up to you and says, what do you do? I said, I make your customer your hero. Obviously, if you can say something up front that gets people to ask you a question and engage them that way, that's the key to it. I'm sure that you help people do that a lot. And that's what it's all about. People, they once you get their interest, that's what it's all about. And if you're shy going to a networking meeting, all you do is just walk up to somebody, introduce yourself, and ask them who they are and what they do. And you'll get them talking, and the comfort starts right there. So, I mean, there's all different ways to do it, but it all starts with making whoever you're talking to, in your case, as a marketing specialist, the customer, the hero. I love that analogy.
Yeah. Well, and Chip, you made such a great point about networking. It's very rare that the people in the room are the people you're going to sell to. But also by centering your messaging in a networking environment around the problem you solve helps them listen. Because honestly, if all people remember about me is that I'm a marketing person, marketing consultant, marketing specialist, whatever word they associate to it, I get leads for, will you run my Facebook ads? That's not what I do. But if I talk about the problem I solve, it means you or Eric, when you're in conversation with people in your networks and they're like, I feel like I'm throwing spaghetti against the wall with my marketing. I'm not sure what to do. I'm wasting all this time and money and it's not getting me what I want. You're like, hey, I know somebody that solves that problem.
Yes.
Let me introduce you. But the words they're saying aren't that they need a marketing consultant.
No,
So.
and they usually never do. But that actually brings us back to where we started this conversation, where you're trying to make that human connection, and you can't make that if you're not showing up in your business.
Exactly.
So it is so important for you to, be who you are. And it's not, the word authentic and authenticity has been thrown around so much that it's almost lost all meaning. And unfortunately, people have started using it incorrectly because they'll use it as an excuse for bad behavior. It's like, well, I'm just being me. It's like, no, that's not what being authentic is. It's about having values and living up to those values.
Yeah.
And that's, what you help showcase.
Yeah. And it's also this both authenticity and transparency are very heavily used in marketing. And you're right, sometimes it is an excuse for bad behavior. And mind you, I do not mind being polarizing in marketing because actually good marketing repels as much as it attracts because you want your right fit people. You don't want a bunch
Yes.
of people that don't match. That said, and it was again one of my mentors that said this, so I can't take credit for the original thought, is being transparent and authentic does not mean you have to share every bit of your life out there on the
Yes.
internet. And, for example, you may have a really strong viewpoint, or you might be going through something. It's already in my networking circles, but I went through a 3-year caregiving journey with my dad, and that affected my business. And I'm very transparent about that now. But when I was going through it, I wasn't necessarily sharing all the gory details out there.
Right.
And it didn't mean I was hiding anything. It was my journey. And it didn't affect how I would show up and serve my customers. So it didn't need to be out there.
Exactly.
So
Again,
it's
it's,
that balance.
right. There is such a thing as a private life that does not have to enter into the business part of it.
Yes.
Well, we are just about at the end of our time. So if our listeners would like to get a hold of you, learn more about your services, how can they do so?
Well, obviously, my website is one way. It is phoenix818.com. Phoenix spelled like the city, even though that is not where I live, and the number 818. But they can also find me on LinkedIn. That's my favorite place to hang out from a social perspective. So they can also reach out on LinkedIn and just shoot me a note. Always best not to do a blind connection. This is just good marketing tips. Don't just say you want to connect, like give some context. But yeah, they can reach me both of those ways.
All right, great. So Chip, what do you think is the big takeaway for our listeners this week?
Well, I love the purpose of alignment in dealing with your customers. I love making the customer the hero because that's what it's all about. And all you're doing through this is, we talked about simplicity, is you're catering to basic human nature. And by getting back to the basics and doing a nice little assessment with your customer to find out all about them or potential client so that you can meet their needs exactly the way that they need them met, it's just a perfect step-by-step way of doing things. And it's the way that things should be done. And so it's just been a pleasure watching the way that you approach things and knowing, I'm sure, the value that you bring to a lot of your customers. So congrats. It's been a great journey.
That means a lot. And yeah, I love simplicity because, as small business owners, there's a lot to do. And even if it's a bigger small business, there's a lot to do. And we just we deserve to have our lives be simpler.
Yep.
So
Yeah,
by
another thing you do.
simplifying our marketing strategy, it helps us have our lives be just a little simpler.
Yep, and you guys
Nice.
focus on that, and that's what's so important.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think for me, the big takeaway is the importance of being human in your business. And again, that doesn't mean revealing everything about yourself, but you have to have those commonalities with your customers to build that connection. And that's about your mission. It influences your messaging. It really does affect every part of your business. And it does boil down to start with why. Why are you doing what you do?
Yeah.
You've been listening to the Success Showcase. You can catch us every week at xvadio.com, the Apple Podcasts app, Google Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Audible, Amazon Music, and wherever you find podcasts. Remember, make this your best week ever and make next week even better. We'll see you then.